Welcome to the Pivotal Decisions podcast, where we know that the decisions you make today will determine your tomorrow. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Pivotal Decisions. I'm so glad to have you with me. Hey, you could do me a great favor and blessing if you would go to the Pivotal Decisions YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button. That would be wonderful and a blessing. And also, you then would have access to all of the content of the Pivotal Decisions podcast. Today, on this episode of Pivotal Decisions, I want to talk to you about a really important topic, especially as we head into the Thanksgiving season, the Christmas season, and you'll be around friends, you'll be around family, and you'll be at parties and gatherings, and you'll be surrounded by people. I want to talk to you about the stewardship of influence, using your platform for good. We all have influence, but it's not all the ways that we steward that influence for good. So I want to talk to you today on this episode of Pivotal Decisions about the stewardship of influence. Let me start with a story. It's about a man that probably most of you have never heard of, but his influence literally changed the world. His name was Edward Kimball. Edward Kimball was not a preacher. He was not a missionary. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher in the 1850s. Every week he showed up to teach just a handful of teenage boys. And in his class of teenage boys, there was a particular young man that Kimball had a burden for. And one day, a deep conviction fell on Edward Kimball that he needed to talk to this young man. And so Kimball walked into the shoe store where this young man worked. He found him in the stock room surrounded by boxes of shoes. And Edward, there in that shoe store, shared the gospel with this young man and told him how much God loved him. And that teenager's name was Dwight L. Moody. D.L. Moody would go on to become one of the great evangelists in all of history, preaching to over 100 million people in an age before television, radio, or the internet. Millions came to Christ. It was one ordinary Sunday school teacher that was a good steward of his influence. But the story doesn't stop there. J. Wilbur Chapman, while a student at Lake Forest College in the late 1870s, attended a Moody meeting in Chicago. And after the service, he received personal counseling from D.L. Moody that helped him really have assurance of his salvation. And later, Chapman became a friend and co-worker of Moody's. Billy Sunday worked for Chapman for a brief time as an assistant, helping to organize his evangelistic meetings. Sunday had been converted at a street corner meeting held by the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago. Billy Sunday held an evangelistic campaign in Charlotte in 1924. In a men's prayer and fellowship group, it was known as the Billy Sunday Layman's Evangelistic Club. Later, it would become famously known as the Charlotte's Businessmen's Club. This group was instrumental in inviting Mordecai Ham to Charlotte for a 1934 revival. And at that meeting, a young man by the name of Billy Graham was converted as a teenager, which was led by Mordecai Ham. The revival was led by Mordecai Ham. All of that, Chapman, Sunday, Mordecai Ham, all of that can be traced back to one faithful Sunday school teacher by the name of Edward Kimball. He was a good steward of his influence, and it changed the world. He never stood on a stage. He never wrote a book, but he stewarded his influence. And God multiplied it beyond anything he could ever imagine. And that's what I want to talk today about on this episode of Pivotal Decisions, about being a good steward of your influence. The truth is, every single one of us, every one of you listening to this podcast today, you have influence. It may not look the same for all of us, but God expects us to use it wisely, faithfully, and for the glory of God. So let's talk about what does it mean to steward our influence? What does the Bible teach us about how to use the influence that we have in our homes, in our workplaces, in our community for something that will outlast us? And that's really what we all desire in the human heart. We want to do something that has eternal significance. Every one of us has influence. You may not have a stage, a title, a large following, but someone is watching your life. Someone is being shaped by your example, by your words, by your faith. You see, influence isn't about a position, it's about impact. And whether you're leading a team, raising your kids, teaching students, serving in ministry, teaching a Sunday school class of a handful of teenage boys, whatever it is, you're influencing someone every single day. The real question is not, do you have influence? The real question is, how are you using your influence? Jesus said in Matthew 5, he said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." That's what influence is all about. Using our lives to point people to Christ. Influence is stewardship. God has entrusted to us not to elevate ourselves, but to make him known to the world. So today, let me share with you some biblical principles that will help us be good stewards of our influence wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Remember, influence is not about a stage. It's not about how large the group is around you or how many followers you have on TikTok or whatever. It's about wherever you are, whatever you are doing, use that influence for the glory of God. So here's some things to remember about being a good steward of our influence. First, influence begins with character, not charisma. Man, our world needs to hear this. That influence begins with character, not charisma. Charisma will attract people to you, but character is what keeps their respect for you. Talent can open doors with people, but only integrity will keep them open so you can influence them. Your private world will always shape your public influence. Proverbs 4:23 tells us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So here's some practical application of this. Make it your goal this week to care for your heart. I mean, you got to spend time with God. Pray honestly. Be real. Be the same person in private that you are in public. Influence that lasts begins with integrity. Here's number 2. Recognize your sphere of influence. You might look at yourself and think, man, I don't really have any influence. I'm not a very influential person. But God has placed you where you are so you can have an impact. It's not an accident. Your address is not an accident. Your place of work is not an accident. Where you go to school is not an accident. Esther 4:14, who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Your influence, it looks different for all of us. Your influence might be raising kids. Your influence might be the people that work for you. Your influence might be your coworkers. Your influence might be mentoring a student. Your influence might be leading your connect group, small group, Sunday school class. But whatever it is, it's not about the platform or the stage. It's about wherever God has placed you, using that to influence them for good. Maybe write down 5 people. Write down the names of 5 people right now. Just take out a piece of paper, write down the names of 5 people that you have contact with, that you influence, and then begin to pray over them and asking God for open doors for you to invest in them in eternal things that matter, have spiritual conversations with them. Recognize your sphere of influence. We all have it. We might not recognize it, but there are people in our life that we influence. Number 3, influence grows through service, not status. In the world that we live in, we celebrate status. We celebrate visibility. We celebrate, man, they have 100,000 people that follow them on Instagram. I'm an Instagram influencer. You know, we celebrate status and visibility. And in that culture, Jesus calls us to serve. Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. The great influencers of God's kingdom are servants, people that have a servant heart, people that serve without looking for anything in return, people that serve without looking for a payback. They're not looking for a pat on the back. They're not looking for the limelight. They're not looking for a position. They just serve. Ask yourself, how can I serve instead of being seen? Influence isn't measured, listen now, influence isn't measured by applause. It's measured by impact. Your impact might be on a small group of people, and maybe you never receive any kind of applause or recognition. But those lives have been changed. They've been impacted by your influence. Influence isn't measured by applause. It's measured by impact. Number 4, use your words to build, not break. Words are one of the most powerful tools of influence that we have. That's why the Bible tells us in Proverbs 18 that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Every word that we speak, it either plants hope in someone or it spreads harm. It either builds someone up or it tears them down. Before you post, speak, text, let me encourage you to take a break, pause, and pray and ask, will this bring grace into their life or will it tear them down? Choose words that heal. Choose words that encourage. Choose words that build up. Choose words that celebrate. Encourage. Don't tear down. We live in a world where people thrive on tearing down. But the influential people that will have an eternal influence use the words to build up, not to break down. Number 5, influence requires consistency. You can't build trust overnight. You can't build influence overnight. True influence is built through consistency, through faithfulness, through every day being a genuine person. Galatians 6:9, here the Apostle Paul is writing this, and he tells us, let us not grow weary in doing good. Why does Paul say that? Because he knows it's easy to grow weary, and it's easy to grow weary in doing good. So let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. It's easy to give up. One of our spiritual enemies' greatest weapons is to discourage us. And right now, you might be thinking, I have no influence. Those people will never listen to me. My kids never listen to me. No one ever acknowledges me. Let's not grow weary in doing good. For at the proper time, We will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Be consistent, show up, follow through. Even when no one notices, God does. Consistency builds credibility, and credibility creates influence. Let me say that again to you. Consistency builds credibility, and credibility creates influence. Number 6, influence multiplies through mentoring. I bring this up because the point of your influence is to pass it on. Paul tells the young pastor Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, he says, entrust these truths to faithful people who will be able to teach others also. We're not just called to lead, but we are called to reproduce leaders. Find one person you can pour into. It's simple things. When we hear the word mentoring, we think, oh, well, I've got to have a program. We've got to read books. We've got to take them to lunch. Go have coffee with someone. Ask how they're doing. Ask how they're doing with their faith. Say a prayer for them. Mentoring is simply living out your faith. And most of the time, mentoring is just loving someone. I care about you. How are you doing? Let me pray for you. How's God working in your life? And spend time with that person. Invest in them. We're called not just to lead, but we're called to reproduce. And number 7, influence demands courage. This is important because if you're going to influence other people, you got to have courage. You got to take a stand for truth when it's going to be unpopular. That's what leaders do. That's what influential people do that are living their life for the glory of God. Joshua 1:9 says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That's the promise. You be strong, you be courageous. Why? Well, there's going to be people that don't like what you have to say. They're not going to like the truth. But when you're strong and courageous, the promise is God will be with you wherever you go. Influence often requires courage to speak up, to take a stand, to lead differently than the world does. When you face a situation where you're tempted to be silent, ask God to give you courage to speak, courage to act with conviction and grace. Courage will inspire others. And when you have courage, it develops influence. Influence demands courage. And then finally, number 8, influence must always point people to Christ. I mean, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. This is why we pray for influence. This is why we want influence. This is why we deal with this topic. It isn't about us. It isn't to give us a platform, a stage, a following. It is so we can point people to the Savior of the world. John the Baptist said in John 3:30, I must decrease, he must increase. If your influence doesn't lead people closer to Jesus, then we've missed the purpose of it. We've missed the purpose of why God has given that to us and why God has put people in our life. Does my influence draw people to Christ, or does it just bring attention to me? Let me ask you, how are you doing with your influence? Because whether you realize it or not, someone is watching your life. Someone is learning from you. Use your influence to build, not to break, to encourage, not to elevate yourself. Use it to point other people to the hope of the gospel. Because one of the most pivotal decisions you'll make is to be a steward of your influence for the glory of God. Well, thank you for joining me on today's episode of Pivotal Decisions. If this encouraged you, would you take a moment to share it with a friend, someone in your circle of influence, and help spread the word about Pivotal Decisions? You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, on the YouTube channel, Pivotal Decisions. That would be a great blessing. And until next time, I'm your host, Stan Paris, reminding you that the decisions you make today will determine your tomorrow.